I'll fix it.
So it's apotropaic. It's not apocalyptic.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream on History 5 Podcast. And today I'm joined by Professor Barnea. And today we're discussing his article titled Thwarting the Evil Eye, Visa through the Prism of Achaemenid Aramaic Sources. And I'll have the link to download the article in the description below, and also in the it'll also be in the pinned comment as well. That being said, God, thank you for joining me today.
So it was a pleasure. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So to kind of start us off, to get everybody to follow what we're discussing, you're looking at Achaemenid Aramaic sources. You're looking at Persian sources, and in connection with the Passover. What kind of connections are being discussed here?
Yeah, actually, I mean, can you maybe share the article on the screen, or do you have it open?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that'll be the best way to share it with the viewers. But basically, so we already talked about a much older publication of mine in my book from a few years ago that we talked about quite a bit, and it's freely available to download as a PDF. So I recommend people to download it for free. Anyway, so in that older article, I talked about the Passover, specifically, I mean, not the Passover, but what scholars considered to be the Passover for many of them, from about a century, almost all of the 20th century and up to 2024. And that particular document, that's called the Passover Letter, that particular document discussed a certain observance that needs to be observed in a date range that corresponds generally to the Passover, to the biblical Passover, and that is, and it's understandable why most scholars consider that to be the Passover. What I show there, and what I repeated in the article that we're talking about today, is that these assumptions need to be very seriously and critically reconsidered, because that date range in the Achaemenid period, so in the Persian period, that particular date range is not is important not only to the Yahwists or the Jews, and might have not been at all at that point important to them yet, but it certainly is in the Zoroastrian world, and so I talk about it quite a bit, and show that there are a lot of characteristics in what we have from this very, very fragmented papyrus. A lot of features that are, or I shouldn't say a lot, because there aren't a lot. There's not a lot of information, but the information that we do have there is very much related, can be related to the Zoroastrian Yasna rather than the Passover, and that should not be surprising, because we can show in a very clear way that that there was very deep, very intimate assimilation of cultic phenomena between the Yahwists / Jews and the Zoroastrians at the time. And as I mentioned in that article and in several other articles of mine, they had the community at Elephantine had a fire holder, or a fire altar, as some people call it, in their temple, and that is documented. They themselves talk about it. They discuss it in their own archives, and so we can show in a very, very clear way that the cultural and cultic symbiosis, or cross-pollination, if you will, or influence, was very, very strong among the Yahwists, at least at Elephantine. My subsequent to that, I also mentioned in several other places, and in many occasions that I had to discuss this with other scholars, that the fact that the Bible is familiar with the concept of a perpetual fire is probably due to the existence of a similar fire altar also in Judea and probably in Jerusalem. So a fire altar / fire holder, because it's not really an altar, you don't offer anything on it. It's for fire veneration, and so. But a similar concept of a perpetual fire also made it into Judea. That's how the Bible got. The biblical author became familiar with it, and not only familiar, but placed it really at the center of their description of ritual practice. And so probably there was also such a fire holder, again, a importation, assimilation, influence, if you will, of Zoroastrian background into Yahwistic and Jewish practice. So that documented practice can certainly allow us to think that there were other things as well that were assimilated, such as certain aspects of the Zoroastrian Yasna, which would be now reflected in this so-called Passover letter. And in the Passover letter, what we have or the so-called Passover letter, again, it has nothing to do, or at least nothing directly to do with the Passover. What I suggest in my article is that it might be a precursor to the Passover, and that certainly does make sense, and I'll explain why. But at that point, what we have is a document that talks about the need to become pure, and it does not describe what purity means. So that is a purity that is well known, well established, well practiced at the time. And so the need to be pure, the need to appoint certain people, and the need to drink a certain drink in a certain period, which is very important to the Zoroastrians, a certain time range, date range. That is what is said in this document, and my suggestion is that this was an observation of the Zoroastrian Yasna, not because the Yahwists became Zoroastrian. They did not convert, they did not become Zoroastrian. They simply adopted certain cultic elements in order to show loyalty to the empire. And in the Zoroastrian worldview and in the Achaemenid worldview, specifically in that particular empire, showing loyalty means to be pure, to adhere to the truth, or the cosmic truth, to the Asha. And you do that by participating in certain purification rituals, of which the Yasna is the main one. And so my suggestion is that this was part of their being loyal to the Persian Empire. The close relationship between Yahwists and the Persian Empire, very, very close, very intimate, is well known. It's also documented in the Bible. It's documented in material finds from Judea and from Samaria, and it's documented in many different documents at Elephantine. And so this basically completes a picture. If this was a one-off, certainly that would be doubt. We can doubt it. But this basically completes a very intricate picture where we have this very clear assimilation of Zoroastrian practices under the Achaemenid Empire and the will to become part of the empire in a very, very real sense. Again, it does not mean that they converted to Zoroastrianism. Now, I mentioned that this might be a precursor to the Passover, because what happens in the Yasna is that you drink a drink that comes from a pressed something that is pressed. In the Yasna, it's from the hauma. It's from a specific plant. But it needs to be something pressed that creates this intoxicating drink. In the Jewish tradition, that becomes the wine. And in this same ceremony, in the Zoroastrian sense, you eat basically what is unleavened bread. So in the Zoroastrian tradition, that is the dron or Daron portion. And it used to be in Avestan times, in old times, it used to be actual, maybe a part of a cow or a goat. But later on, and I posit that this happened when the Zoroastrianism became imperial, in the imperial cult. And the reason, so it became a unleavened bread at that time. And the reason for that is that when you have to observe a daily ritual on the scale of an empire, offering animal sacrifice daily is extremely unworkable. And so instead of that, just offering unleavened bread makes much more sense in an imperial context. Again, of course, this has to be hypothetical. We don't know. We don't have any specific documentation that shows that they already had unleavened bread in the Achaemenid period. So I have to state that, but I make a logical assumption that this might have been the case already in the Achaemenid period. In any event, in terms of cultic practice, the only two rituals that have a pressed intoxicating drink and unleavened bread as part of the ritual are the Zoroastrian Yasna and the Passover, that we know, and also the Christian Mass, whether it's Catholic or Orthodox. So you have the wine and the unleavened bread, and so or the leavened bread if you're Orthodox. And so, but in any event, you have this connection, and so these are the only two or three, if we count the Jewish and Christian differently, three cases where you have this connection of these central elements. And so the fact that the Yahwists / Jews adopted the certain elements from the Yasna in order to become pure and be basically have the status of a free nation within the Achaemenid Empire at the end of the 5th century before the Common Era, that eventually inspired the Passover and, of course, its offshoots later on. So that was in 2024 when I talked about this. My newer article that what we're looking at now basically continues the study of what can be connected to the Passover in antiquity. I have another one that I'm working on as well, but that is this third one is a very minor point, but I will make it just for completion. I'm not ready to discuss it at this point yet, but it's not a earth-shattering innovation, at least not yet. But this particular new article studies two sources, and these are really the only two sources where the word Pascha, the word Passover, actually appears. And these two ostraka share the same traits. And maybe we can just read the text. That the first one is on, I think, page 9 of the article. Yeah, it's page 9. I'll just read it. Let me scroll on my screen here. So page 9 from the article, and folks can download it as well and read with us if you already have the link there. Okay, so this article is written to a person by the name of Hoshaya. It says, to Hoshaya, your peace, which is the general greeting at the time, your peace, basically it's a shorthand for may the gods keep your peace at all time. Now watch alone. So be by yourself and don't let anyone else around the toddlers until Achotab comes. So be careful, watch over the toddlers, over the Yanuka, literally those who suck milk. So watch over them until a certain woman comes, a woman that is well attested in many sources at the time. Do not entrust them to others. So there is a very clear sense of anxiety here. That's going to be a key word today. There's a very clear sense of anxiety here about the safety of the toddlers. Watch alone. Don't let anyone around them, do not entrust them to others. Watch over them alone until Achutab comes. And on the other side of this relatively short document, it's an ostrakon. It means that it's written on a shard of clay, which is basically the ancient world's instant messaging, the ancient world's SMS or WhatsApp. That is how you sent quick messages. You just took a broken piece of clay, which was found really in any household, and you just wrote a quick message, or had the local scribe write a quick message on it and deliver it to someone maybe in the marketplace, or just run and give it to someone in the community. So we have a lot of these ostraka, and they are absolutely critical to understanding the daily life of the people in antiquity in general, of course, not just in Elephantine, but everywhere. So again, to Hoshaya, keep watch alone over the toddlers. Do not entrust them to anyone. If their bread, and keep in mind, this is regular bread. This is not unleavened bread. There's nothing special. It's not even flat bread. There is no special word here. Just the word lechem, the word bread. If their bread has been ground, knead for them 1 kab, which is basically a handful, before their mother comes. So prepare it in beforehand. So time is important. And send word to me when you, all of you, plural, shall perform Passover, shall perform Pascha. Do send word of the peace of those toddlers. So again, repeats this. Send word to me, again, twice. Make sure you prepare the bread before their mother comes, and do not entrust them to others. So you see that the entire document, everything from beginning to end, revolves around the well-being, the safety of babies, of toddlers. And it shows great anxiety regarding their well-being, probably their health. Maybe there's a plague going on, something like that. You do not entrust them to others. You make sure that they only stay with their mother, and time is of the essence. The bread needs to be ready before she comes. So this is a very clearly a text that shows this great anxiety. But again, there's no the word Pascha, the word for Passover, appears here, but there is nothing apart from that really connects this to the biblical Passover. The word bread here is not special. It's just the general word for bread. There is nothing special about this bread. It certainly does not need to be flat bread or unleavened bread or anything like that. Now, the study of this particular document required a lot of attention to detail. It's been debated for over 100 years. If you scroll down, you can see just how the level of detail that needed to be analyzed here in order to study what is actually written here, because a lot of this has been damaged. But if we go now to the second document, which is on page 19, so you can scroll down to page 19. This document I published separately in a different article because this particular ostrakon, which is a very long ostrakon, it's 17 lines, which is for the I think it's the if I remember correctly, it's the longest ostrakon, again, which is a text written on a shard of clay. It's the longest of these in Aramaic that we have from Egypt. So it's a relatively long document. And what I showed in a previous article was that this particular ostrakon, which has been published, was published for the first time in 1908. From 1908 till last year, when I published this, was read backwards. So the was simply read in the wrong direction. That's why it was deemed to be opaque and complete, something that we could not understand for a very long time, for 115 years, simply because it was written read in the wrong direction. Now we can I show this, and I explain why and all the logic for reading it in the correct direction. And so we can read the text now in English, again, page 19. To whomever, we don't know who is the addressee of this particular ostracon. So to whomever, the letter that you gave to Hoshea, so it might be again Hoshea, the same person that we saw in the previous ostracon. Some of this, of course, is reconstructed text, and I explained the logic behind this in the body of the article. But the letter that I gave to a certain person, if you can make do something. Now, we both saw a person, an Egyptian person, Pahman, son of Asnak, saying to us, the letter which Mikiah sent to you, behold, it is the word of a scribe, meaning it is an official, authoritative letter, which Rok, again, another name, sent me, which is a Persian name, sent to me, and I sent to him to explain the matter to me. So just pausing here, there is a letter. Again, we don't know all the details here about the names, but what we do know clearly is that there is a letter that is an official letter, a word of a scribe, so it's an official authoritative letter, and I explain in the body of the article what that expression means and other instances where it's used. So it's an official, authoritative, important document. Now, a certain person with a Persian name sent it to the author of this document, who sent it to another person and sent it to a different person to explain it to him. It is clearly critically important to understand this letter inside this document that they received, this official document, well, that there is no error, there is no room for mistake. They need to understand it. Stakes are high. Again, the previous document that we saw about the safety of the toddlers, also very high stakes, very important, to a very high level of anxiety. Again, you have to keep the toddlers safe, and here you have to really understand absolutely perfectly, and there is no room for mistake, what this document says. Moreover, I send him to show the order and / command to Hoshea. So again, sending it to now another person to explain the matter. So again, a very important document that needs to be understood by a bunch of people, and no room for mistakes. Now, second side of this document. For this reason, I sent you this day on the boat of this Egyptian person, saying, I shall enter Sayin, which is modern day Aswan, this day. Now, on account of the inspectors, we know, I won't get into the detail. Again, I explained in the article why these are inspectors who are arriving on this day, if you can perform the Pascha. So here we go again. This is the Passover, and assist me just as I would assist you, etc. We don't, that last part is very fragmentary. So what do we have here? This is now the second ostracon where the stakes are extremely high. This person has sent a number of persons sent the letter among them to understand it completely. And the person writing this document says, well, for this reason, so because we need to understand it so well, because it is so critical, so important to us for whatever reason, I am going to go on the boat of this Egyptian person, and I will enter into Aswan today because of these inspectors who are arriving today. So clearly the person coming to Aswan, to Sayin, has something to do with these inspectors. That's probably why this is so critical, that inspectors are coming, and please perform the Pascha. So, or the Passover ritual, whatever that is in this context. So again, going back to the lowest common denominator here, we have high stakes situations, two very anxious situations where people are worried about the health of toddlers in one, and worried maybe about their own careers in another. But these are situations of high anxiety throughout the entire document, and at the kind of the climax of this very anxious situation, the author refers to a Pascha ritual, or a something that is called Pascha, to assist that person here in this particular second ostracon. Okay, so this is the background. Again, just to recap, we have 3 documents. The first one I talked about, which I published a couple of years ago, called the Passover Letter, which is more of a Zoroastrian observance than an actual Passover ritual. And then but this first one, which is a papyrus, does not have the word Passover in it at all. Apart from the date range, really, there's nothing certain that can connect it to the Passover. And so that's one. And these 2 that do have the word Passover, or the word that will eventually come to be used as the word for Passover, but there's nothing in the context, no sacrifice, no gathering in a specific location, nothing about Jerusalem, nothing about the temple. There is really nothing to connect it to the Passover. And I did not mention it earlier. In the first ostracon that we read, it actually said on page 9, it said, "Tell me, when are you going to observe or perform Passover?" Now, if there is a feast for which that question can never be asked, is the biblical Passover, because the biblical Passover is not just a date, the 14th of Nisan, but it's also a specific time of day. So in the Bible, the Passover is the 14th of Nisan at night, between the sunset and the first stars being visible in the night sky. So that particular time period, called Ben Ha'arbaim in the biblical text, is given. So there is, specifically with regard to the Passover, you can never ask if biblical Passover is observed. There's never a reason to ask someone, when are you going to observe the Passover? Because it is already set. Not only the date, but also the time of day is prescribed. So the fact that they had to ask this means that this was not, at least the Passover was not established in a specific date and specific time yet. And again, probably was not the biblical Passover. In all of these cases, we do not have anything that, again, except for the name and the date range, we have nothing that connects us to the actual biblical Passover. So that is already very important, and very and certainly something that needs to be taken into account. Now, I want to go down to page 20 on this in this article, and I make a comment there on calendrical considerations, because as I said, the only element that can be actually connected to the biblical Passover is this period between the 15th of Nisan. Again, the Passover sacrifice is offered on the night between the 14th and the 15th, and the actual Passover feast, it's the 7-day feast of the unleavened bread. Excuse me, drink some water. That is between the 15th and the 21st of Nisan, and that is the date range that we do have in this so-called Passover letter. But that particular time frame, the 15th to the 25th of any lunar month in the Achaemenid period, is called Vishapata. Okay, so it has a very specific name. And in the Zoroastrian sources, we actually read in several places. I'll just quote one that is on page 21 in the article. We dedicate them, so we dedicate our prayers to the full moon, and for the in between the 7th day righteous time of the order. So this particular period of 7 days, 15th to the 20, or 15/14th, the night between, to the 21st of any lunar month. Now, the Nisan is simply the first month of the year. So looking at this date range is not particularly Jewish or Yahwistic. It's simply that the first time in a calendar year in which this Vishapatha time is observed. So it's not the fact that this date range appears does not necessarily mean that we're talking about the Passover. Another important point to make is that at this point, we have zero evidence that the Passover was a thing yet. Okay, we have, of course, the Bible, but that's not a primary document. The Bible is not. The Bible, of course, is a very intricate, very complex work that has been edited and redacted over centuries, over a long period of time, and so it's not a primary document. It's not something that was written in real time by an author, living in the moment and reporting what they see, and with no later editorial intervention and and redactionary work. So what we have here, as I said, is simply the Achaemenid, the regular Achaemenid observance of this very important time of any lunar month, but this is simply the first time in the calendar year where it is observed. So that is regarding the calendar arguments. Now, the etymology of the word Pascha. Again, we talked about the fact that the name appears. So you can ask, well, if the name is there, why isn't it specifically? Why can't we know that it is the Passover? Well, I already mentioned that we don't have any other feature in these documents that can be absolutely positively identified as related to the Passover. No sacrifice, no that period between the evenings that we talked about in the Bible. There is no gathering of people around, no temple, nothing no unleavened bread, nothing that is in a very objective way connected to the Passover. But what about the name Passover? Now, it has been suggested, this is in later in page 21 in the article, it has been suggested that the Passover, Pascha, comes from the Akkadian adjective pesum, which means crippled or deformed. And this is what we find in the Bible as well. We find this root, Pei Samechet, or this root that is used for Pesach. We find it also used quite often for a person who is crippled, who walks funny, who is deformed. Okay, we have that in the Bible, so we know that this root is connected, and it is connected to the Akkadian adjective much earlier than the Bible for a crippled / deformed person. And as I show in the article, it is also the name that was given to the deity Best, the Egyptian demigod, apotropaic protector deity, already in the Old Kingdom. So already in the New Kingdom period, in the Elamarna period, we have this documented that the Egyptian god was called by the Assyrians as Pesum, but the same label that the Passover has. So it seems very likely that the Passover is connected to being crippled, deformed. Now, in antiquity, and that this is documented for millennia, that in antiquity, being deformed, a deformed person, or an image or a statue or a figurine of something deformed was considered to be a protective amulet against the evil eye. And what I claim here is that, and we saw this very clear context of anxiety in these two ostraca that we studied earlier, that basically this term referred to an apotropaic observance against the evil eye, whatever that evil eye may be. Now, in the case of the children, of course, if this was a plague or something like that, which makes a lot of sense, excuse me, they would observe this Pascha in order to appeal to the forces of good against this evil eye, to protect the children. In the second case, where the inspectors are coming, they probably appeal for protection against the evil eye for their own business or their own livelihood or whatever that is. All of this goes back to this root peshum, which is the root for Pascha. So basically, to sum it up at this point, at least, the origin of the term and the idea of the Passover is a protection from demons, the apotropaic observance, protection from the evil eye. That is the basic idea of the Passover itself. We have this actually already in the Bible. We have an echo of this. And Jacob, I don't know if you can look. I mean, this is in Exodus 12. Let's see here.
Where precisely
The
in
exact.
Exodus 12?
I don't know if you can look at the pull up the biblical text. But in I don't have the exact reference. Exodus 12. Okay.
I got it. Give me one second.
Just looking. Yeah, 12:13. So in Exodus 12:13, in the Bible, we have this. This is the beginning of the Exodus from Egypt, and in that story, we have this very famous story about the children of Israel painting blood on the entrance to their houses. Also, and this is directly related to the Passover, also to protect themselves from the evil eye. And in the biblical text, this is called the destroyer, or the mashchit in Hebrew. Okay? So we have this exact same protection from the evil eye used in the biblical sense in order to describe the now evolution of the word Passover from a family or a closed group observance of an apotropaic ritual to a quote-unquote national observance now. So this is what is being now introduced in Exodus chapter 12. Basically, it says what you've observed up until now, all people, what you knew as Pascha, as an observance against the evil eye, okay, an observance that protects you from demons, now becomes a national observance in the Passover against demons as well, but in a national corporate manner. And it is now, of course, taken over by the entire nation. Or I'm using nation, of course, this is anachronistic to use nation at this point in time in antiquity, but I'm using this as a collective of people bound by this authoritative text that is the text of Exodus, and basically appropriate this family observance or this small group observance into a national observance for the nation. What's interesting is that towards the end of the Republican era in Rome did exactly the same thing. They took family household apotropaic observances, again, household observances against the evil eye, and made them into a national observance to protect the nation. So what happened in the biblical text, and I would assume that this idea to appropriate this household observance into a national observance happened maybe sometime in the 2nd century before the Common Era, somewhere like that, in the Hellenistic period, and then it happened in Rome as well. That is something that, again, the Jewish people are not the only ones who to have done this at all. This is actually a very logical thing to do in antiquity, in the logic of the ancient world, because in the ancient world, the evil eye was a very, very real thing. It is for a lot of people even today, whether they're religious or not. And they wanted protection from the evil eye, and these types of observances were absolutely commonplace. And so, again, the history of the Passover that we're discussing today basically goes from this observance that was this household observance to protect from the evil eye, to later in the 5th century. So I should also mention that these ostraka that we studied earlier, these 2 ostraka with the babies and these people anxious about this important letter, authoritative letter, these are from the beginning of the 5th century before the Common Era. The so-called Passover letter that we talked about, which is actually a Yasna type ceremony, that the Yahwists have assimilated in order to show themselves as loyal subjects to the Achaemenid Empire. That is the end of the 5th century before the Common Era. And these observances coalesced somewhere in the 4th to the 3rd century before the Common Era, and eventually became what we know today as the Passover. And then, of course, in the Christian reception of this same process to the Last Supper, okay, to the Last Supper, and again, what is observed in daily Mass and in churches that observe daily Mass. And so this absolutely incredible itinerary of this term and this set of concepts throughout history really is an incredible perspective into how religious ideas evolve through unexpected channels over time and become, and some of them become absolutely central to religious observances. Again, Passover is as central as you can get in Judaism, and of course the Last Supper in Christianity. All of these started from an apotropaic observance in the 5th century, and added to the mix this idea of this nation becoming part of the Achaemenid Empire, or this group of people, this ethnicity, this ethnic group becoming part of the Achaemenid Empire, and of course then becoming quote unquote nationalized somewhere probably in the 2nd century, probably under the Hasmoneans, just like what it happened in Rome a little bit later on. And again, that is how these types of ideas evolve.
We have a couple of super chat questions. Backen, thank you for your super chat. The hyoma is the soma, it's bang. We know that. We know what plant it is. Cannabis. Zoroaster's wife called it the divine narcotic. Black sands bacteria proves this. Any thoughts on this, God?
Yeah, we don't know. We actually do not know. That cannabis is an option, but if you actually discuss this with the scholars that study the hyoma/soma, there is no consensus. Of course, cannabis is an option, but it's unlikely. In my mind, it's unlikely. But again, I have not studied the the botanics of this and all of the questions around this. I leave it to my colleagues. But from what I know, there is no consensus as to what the original hyoma was.
And just to correct myself,
And it was certainly. I mean, it was pressed. It was pressed, and you drink the juice of the plant. Yeah, I don't know if cannabis. Again, I didn't look at the botanical aspects, but I'm not sure that that qualifies.
And just to correct myself, that word was bacteria, not bacteria.
Okay, bacteria. Sure.
Moving to the next super chat. Back and thank you for another super chat. How do you think animal sacrifices evolved in the returning Judean exiles? Were they simply festival based? When did they become part of regular offerings?
That is an excellent question, and I'll broaden the spectrum a little bit. Animal sacrifice, of course, is very ancient practice. Has been practiced for millennia before the exile, and really before the Iron Age, certainly before the Persian period. So, animal sacrifice is basically the desire of people to show that they can donate to the deities their some of their belongings, something that they have to share with the deity, and so it's a way of showing appreciation and asking for the from the deity something in return. So this is a very old concept, really a very human concept, to think that, okay, I will provide to the deity what I would have, the same kind of food that I would have eaten. I'll provide to the deity for the deity to eat, to consume. So that's a very, I would say, very natural thing, and very old. We have, and there is no reason to think that the Israelites and the Yahwists had any type of sacrifice that was different from what was practiced by their neighbors. It was clearly the same set of sacrifices that anyone else in the region had. At Elephant, and we don't really know what it is, because we don't, again, outside the Bible, which, as I said, is from a historical standpoint, is a very problematic document, because it was edited across such a long time, and so many hands are in it that it's hard to, as a historian, it's really hard to put that into perspective, into historical perspective. So we have to rely on extra biblical sources, and where possible, connected to the biblical text where it's possible, but most of the time we just have the extra biblical sources to go with. And the only place where we really have, or almost the only place where we really have any allusion to sacrifice in a Jewish/Yahwistic context is at Elephantine. And what they have is what it looks like. Again, we have to piece things together, but they did not have, at least not at the end of the 5th century, they did not have animal sacrifice. Okay, they offered barley, maybe types of bread, as was common in many different traditions at the time, and is also part of the biblical set of sacrifices as well. But in a letter at the end of the 5th century, they clearly sent a letter to Judea and Samaria. They receive of which we have 2 drafts, and then they receive a response. Excuse me, we have 2 drafts of a different letter to Judea and Samaria, but we have a response to another letter from that they sent, where they discuss the sacrifices, and the answer, we can glean something from the response that they get from the governors of Judea and Samaria, where they say, basically, do not offer any animal sacrifice. Just keep things the way they were before, and offer, barley sacrifice and things like that. Okay, do not animal sacrifice, but from plant-based sacrifice. But they say keep things the way it was before. So clearly that was the case before, and they wanted something happen at the end of the 5th century to make this community want to change things, and they asked for permission from the authorities in Judea and Samaria, and that request was denied. And so we know that the set of offerings that was at least in the 5th century up to the end of the 5th century that was allowed is not animal sacrifice. We don't know more than that. Maybe animal sacrifice was allowed before the exile, maybe not. Again, from extra biblical sources, we really this is all we have. A logical assumption is that basically they offered, up to a certain point, they probably offered exactly the same set of sacrifices as their Canaanite neighbors, or their, the neighbors wherever they if they were in Egypt, it's the same as in Egypt. But basically the same set of sacrifices that they had surrounding them. There's no reason to think that it was different in any way. Again, end of the 5th century, at some point in time, it was only plant-based, and they asked to change that. They did not. It does not seem like they asked to return to something that they observed before. Rather, the response that they got was told them to observe what happened, to return to the way things were before, which is again this plant-based sacrifice. So that's all we have outside the Bible. And I can't talk to any change that the exile introduced into this system.
And for my final question, the letters in your article that you were talking about, when do they date? When do they date?
So these two ostraca?
Yes.
So we don't have a specific date, but they date to the beginning of the 5th century. So around 470, 475, maybe 490, somewhere in that range, 490 to 470 before the Common Era, somewhere there. It's very hard to tell. I'm not going only by the writing style, by the paleography, but also by the different names that are being used there, which we know to connect them to people who lived at the time. So there are a lot of small indications, but quite a few of them in these different documents and documents that relate to them that allow us to date these documents to the beginning, somewhere in the first quarter, let's say, or the first third of the 5th century before the Common Era.
I'd like to remind everybody, I'll have the link to download Gad's article in the description below and the pinned comment. Again, it's free to download. You can get a PDF copy. And with that being said, Gad,
and probably also Jacob, also the book, which has the article on the Passover, so-called Passover letter, and the Zoroastrian Yasna, and the reason why I think that's a Zoroastrian Yasna. Again, this is free. It's very important for me to share all of this research free.
Well, again, Gad, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and/or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.